The fluorescent lights hummed above the reception desk as she answered another call. "Metropolitan Opera House, how may I help you?" The words came out automatically after 3 years of saying them hundreds of times each day. She smiled even though the person on the phone couldn't see her. A habit she'd picked up from her mother, who always said kindness shows in your voice. Her name was Lisa, and if you'd walked past that desk any day for the past 3 years, you probably wouldn't have looked twice. She was the kind of person who blended into the background, always there, always helpful, but never demanding attention. Her brown hair was usually pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were neat but nothing special, mostly cardigans from thrift stores and comfortable shoes for standing all day. She looked exactly like what she was, a 32-year-old receptionist going through the motions of an ordinary life. But here's what nobody knew. Every single day, as Lisa directed visitors to their seats and printed out tickets, her heart ached with a longing so deep it sometimes took her breath away. She worked in one of the most beautiful opera houses in the country, surrounded by music and artistry, yet she felt like someone pressing their nose against a window, forever on the outside looking in. The walls around her desk were covered with posters of past performances. During slow moments, she'd stare at those posters and remember a different version of herself. A younger girl with bright eyes and big dreams, singing in church choirs and community theater, her voice filling small rooms and making people stop and listen. That girl had believed anything was possible. That girl hadn't yet learned how life has a way of making dreams feel foolish. "You still here?" her coworker called out, packing up his bag at 5 o'clock sharp. "You work too much, you know that?" Lisa just smiled and waved him off. The truth was, she volunteered for extra shifts. Being here, surrounded by the music that leaked through walls during rehearsals, felt closer to her dreams than going home to her quiet apartment where she'd stopped singing years ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed, though Lisa didn't know it yet. The opera house was buzzing with unusual energy. A famous director had announced open auditions for his new production. The lobby had been filled with hopefuls all week, beautiful people in expensive clothes, carrying themselves with the confidence of those who'd trained at prestigious schools and performed on important stages. Lisa had watched them come and go, feeling something twist in her chest. Part admiration, part envy, part grief for the path she'd never taken. She'd overheard their conversations, full of talk about vocal coaches and past performances and connections in the industry. They belonged to a world she'd only ever touched from the outside. "It's mostly for publicity anyway," her supervisor had mentioned during lunch. "You know how these things work. They want the story of discovering fresh talent, but the role's probably already going to someone established. Still, it's good buzz for the show." Lisa had nodded, pretending not to care, while something inside her wilted a little more. The final day of auditions arrived on a Friday. Lisa was at her desk as usual, answering phones and checking people in, when she heard raised voices from the audition floor. Apparently someone had canceled at the last minute, leaving an empty slot in the schedule. The casting assistant was stressed, needing to fill every time slot to make the director happy. "This is ridiculous," the assistant muttered, scanning the lobby for anyone who might fill 15 minutes. Her eyes landed on Lisa. "Hey, you can sing, right?" "Everyone who works at an opera house can sing a little." Lisa felt her face flush. Well, I used to, but perfect. Just go up there and do something, anything. We just need to fill the slot." The assistant was already writing Lisa's name on the schedule. "But I haven't performed in over 10 years. I don't have any training. I'm just the receptionist." The assistant wasn't listening anymore, already moving on to the next crisis. Lisa stood there, her heart hammering in her chest. This was crazy. She couldn't just walk up there. She wasn't prepared. She didn't have the right clothes or the right background or the right anything. But then she thought about her mother. Her beautiful, talented mother who'd been a singer once, before illness stole that dream away. Her mother who'd passed away 5 years ago, leaving behind boxes of sheet music and old recordings, and a daughter who'd buried her own voice along with her grief. Lisa's hands were shaking as she found herself walking toward the auditorium. Each step felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's body move. She clutched a piece of sheet music she'd grabbed from her bag. She always carried some, though she'd never admitted to anyone why. It was a habit from the days when music had been her whole world. The auditorium doors felt impossibly heavy. She pulled them open and stepped into the vast, dark space. Her eyes took a moment to adjust. The stage looked enormous from here, lit by harsh work lights that seemed designed to expose every flaw. A man sat in the third row, slouched in his seat, scrolling through his phone. The director. Even from here she could sense his boredom, his impatience. Next to him, the casting assistant whispered something. They both looked up at Lisa, and she saw it. That instant judgment. That dismissive glance that said she wasn't worth their time. Name and experience, the director called out, not bothering to hide his disinterest. Lisa's voice came out smaller than she wanted. I'm Lisa. I work at the front desk downstairs. The assistant made a sound that might have been a laugh. The receptionist? This is a professional audition. I know, I'm sorry. There was a cancellation and... Just get on with it, the director interrupted, checking his watch. We're behind schedule. Lisa climbed the steps to the stage, her legs feeling like they might give out any second. She handed the sheet music to the pianist, a kind-looking older man who gave her a sympathetic smile that somehow made her feel worse. She could hear people in the back of the auditorium talking, not even bothering to lower their voices. Someone laughed. The stage lights were hot on her face. She could barely see past them into the dark auditorium, but she could feel the skepticism radiating from those shadows. She thought about running. She thought about all the reasons this was a mistake. She thought about that girl she used to be, the one who sang without fear. The pianist played the opening notes, and Lisa closed her eyes, let out a breath, and began to sing. What happened next would change everything. The first note hung in the air like something fragile and precious. Lisa's eyes were still closed, her hands clasped in front of her, and for a moment she wasn't on that stage anymore. She was 12 years old again, standing next to her mother in their small living room, learning how to breathe properly, how to let the music come from somewhere deep inside. In the audience, the director's finger hovered over his phone screen. He'd been about to type a message, dismiss this waste of time, move on to the next thing. But something made him pause. That first note had a quality he couldn't quite name. Pure, maybe. Honest. Different from the technically perfect but emotionally empty performances he'd heard all week. The casting assistant stopped writing. Her pen went still on the paper. In the back of the auditorium, a stagehand who'd been moving equipment froze mid-step. Lisa sang the opening phrase of the aria, her voice soft at first, almost tentative. She was singing Addio del passato, a farewell to the past. The words were in Italian, but somehow everyone listening understood them in a language deeper than words. This was about loss, about dreams that slip away, about the person you thought you'd become and the reality of who you are. Her voice began to grow stronger, not louder necessarily, but more present, more real. It was the kind of singing that doesn't show off technique or demand attention through force. It was the kind that simply tells the truth, and the truth is always compelling. The director slowly lowered his phone to his lap. He leaned forward in his seat. Lisa's voice climbed higher, and there was something happening in that auditorium that rarely happens anywhere. A moment of collective recognition. Every person there, whether they admitted it or not, carried their own abandoned dreams, their own private griefs, their own years of pretending to be satisfied with less than what their hearts truly wanted. And Lisa's voice was somehow singing all of it. The pianist's eyes were wet. He'd accompanied hundreds of auditions over his career, most of them technically proficient and emotionally empty. He'd almost forgotten that music could do this, could reach inside your chest and squeeze your heart until you felt things you'd been trying not to feel. There was a security guard standing by the side door who'd only stopped in because he heard something unusual. He was a practical man, not really into opera or classical music, but he found himself unable to move his throat tight, thinking about his own daughter who'd wanted to be a dancer, but now worked at a call center because dance didn't pay the bills. Lisa reached the middle section of the area, where the melody shifts and deepens. Her voice filled the space with a vibrato that seemed to contain everything: hope and despair, strength and fragility, life and death. She wasn't performing anymore. She was channeling something, letting it pour through her like she was just a vessel for this ancient universal pain. The director felt something he hadn't felt in years: genuine surprise, real discovery. He'd been in this business long enough to become cynical, to assume he'd seen everything. Beautiful voices were common. Training and technique could be bought. But this raw, unfiltered connection between singer and song, this was rare, This was what he'd been looking for without knowing it. In the wings, a few performers who were waiting for their own auditions had gathered to see what was happening. They'd heard the whispers, seen people stopping to listen. Now they stood there, these trained professionals with impressive resumes, and felt something uncomfortable stirring inside them. Jealousy, maybe, or recognition that all their years of expensive training hadn't taught them how to do what this receptionist was doing right now. Lisa's voice soared into the climax of the aria. She was singing about saying goodbye to beautiful dreams, to happy memories, to the past itself. And everyone listening understood that she wasn't just singing about a character in an opera. She was singing about her own life, about the years she'd spent behind that desk, answering phones pretending she was fine, burying the person she'd once hoped to become. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavered. If anything, it grew more powerful. This was years of silence finally breaking open. This was grief transformed into beauty. This was what happens when someone stops hiding and lets the world see who they really are. The casting assistant had completely forgotten to take notes. She sat there with her mouth slightly open, her professional composure utterly shattered. She was 26 years old and had always thought of herself as sophisticated and worldly, above being moved by cheap emotion. But there was nothing cheap about this. This was the real thing. The director rose to his feet without realizing he was doing it. He stood there in the third row, his expensive suit and his important position suddenly meaningless. In that moment, he wasn't a powerful director who could make or break careers. He was just another human being, reminded of something essential that he'd almost forgotten. That art isn't about perfection or credentials or connections. It's about truth, and truth has a power that nothing else can match. Lisa sang the final phrases, her voice dropping to something almost like a whisper, but a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of that vast space. The last note faded slowly, reluctantly, like she was letting go of something precious. And then there was silence. Complete, absolute silence. Lisa opened her eyes. The stage lights were blinding after having them closed for so long. She couldn't see the audience clearly, just dark shapes in the shadows beyond the light. For a moment she thought maybe it had been terrible. Maybe they were all sitting there in stunned silence because she'd embarrassed herself so completely. Then she heard it, a single sound of applause. Slow at first. The director was clapping, his hands coming together with deliberate force. Then the casting assistant joined in. Then the pianist. Then everyone, the stagehands, the security guard, the performers in the wings. Every single person in that auditorium. The sound grew and grew until it was thunderous, echoing off the walls surrounding Lisa from all sides. People were on their feet now. This audience that hadn't expected to be moved, hadn't wanted to waste time on a receptionist with no credentials, now giving her the kind of ovation usually reserved for opening nights. Lisa stood there, shaking, barely able to process what was happening. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing the cheap mascara she'd put on that morning when her biggest concern was whether the coffee machine at work was broken again. The director was walking toward the stage now, his face transformed. He looked younger somehow, alive in a way he hadn't looked when she'd first walked in. He stopped at the edge of the stage and looked up at her, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" Lisa's voice came out barely above a whisper. "My mother taught me." And with those 4 words, another door opened, another chapter began. The director's office was nothing like Lisa had imagined. She'd walked past this door countless times over 3 years, always wondering what lay behind it. Now she sat in a leather chair that was probably worth more than her monthly rent, her hands still trembling, her mascara definitely ruined, trying to process what had just happened. The director sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his desk. His earlier boredom had completely vanished. In its place was an intensity that made Lisa feel both excited and terrified. The casting assistant stood by the window, still looking slightly stunned, like she'd witnessed something that didn't quite fit into her understanding of how the world worked. "Tell me about your mother," the director said gently. Lisa took a shaky breath. This was the story she rarely told anyone, the one that hurt too much to put into words, but something about what had just happened on that stage had cracked her open, and the words came tumbling out. She was a singer. A real one, not like me. She had this voice that could make you forget everything else in the world. When I was little, I'd sit on the floor of whatever theater she was performing in, and I'd watch her become these different characters, Tell these stories. It was like magic. The director nodded, listening with the kind of attention that made you feel like your words actually mattered. She was supposed to perform at Carnegie Hall. It was going to be her big break, the thing that would take her career to the next level. But 2 months before the performance, she got sick. Really sick? Lisa's voice cracked. The doctor said it was some kind of autoimmune thing. It attacked her vocal cords first, then spread to other parts of her body. She couldn't sing anymore. Couldn't even talk without pain. The casting assistant looked away, blinking rapidly. I was 15 when it happened. She was only 37. Young, you know? Too young for everything to fall apart like that. Lisa wiped her eyes. After she couldn't perform anymore, she poured everything into teaching me. We'd practice in our living room for hours. She'd play recordings of the great singers and teach me to listen, really listen to what made them special. She couldn't demonstrate with her own voice anymore, but she could explain it. The technique, the emotion, the way to connect with the music. She sounds like an incredible teacher, the director said quietly. She was, but we couldn't afford formal training. Real vocal coaches, music school. That stuff cost money we didn't have. Her medical bills were crushing us, so it was just her and me and her old books and recordings we'd check out from the library. Lisa smiled through her tears. She used to say that the greatest teachers were the ones who'd lost something. That loss teaches you what really matters in art. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, they could hear the muted sounds of the opera house, people moving equipment, voices in distant hallways, the constant hum of a building dedicated to music. When did she pass away? The casting assistant asked softly. 5 years ago. I was 27. She made me promise something before she died. Lisa's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She made me promise I'd keep singing, that I wouldn't let her illness steal my voice the way it stole hers. But you stopped, the director said. It wasn't a question. I stopped. The admission felt heavy. After she died, I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I tried to sing, all I could think about was her. All the things she should have been able to do. All the stages she should have performed on. It felt wrong for me to have a voice when she didn't, like I was taking something that should have been hers. Lisa looked down at her hands, at the simple receptionist uniform she was still wearing. I took the job here because I thought being around music would be enough. I thought I could be close to it without having to actually do it. That I could live on the edges of this world and that would be okay. But it wasn't okay, the director said. No, it wasn't. It was like slow suffocation. Every day, watching other people do what I was too afraid to do. Too guilty to do. Too convinced I didn't deserve it. The casting assistant moved from the window and sat down in the chair next to Lisa. What made you audition today? Lisa let out a short laugh. Honestly, I didn't plan it. You told me to fill the slot, and before I could think about all the reasons it was a terrible idea, I was already walking to the stage. Maybe I was just tired of being afraid. Or maybe, she paused, maybe it was the date. The date? The director asked. Today is October 31st. 5 years ago today was the last time my mother heard me sing. We were in her hospital room and she was having a good day, relatively speaking. She asked me to sing for her. Just the two of us. I sang the same aria I sang today. When I finished, she was crying and she said, Lisa, promise me you won't waste this gift. Promise me you'll be brave enough to share it with the world, even when I'm gone. The room felt charged with something, grief and hope and possibility all mixed together. I broke that promise for 5 years, Lisa continued. But this morning when I woke up and realized what day it was, I felt her with me. I know that sounds crazy, but I did. And when you asked me to audition, it felt like a sign. Like she was giving me one more chance to keep my word. The director stood up and walked to his bookshelf. He pulled down a worn program from some past performance and showed it to Lisa. This was my mother. She was a costume designer. Brilliant, creative, she worked on Broadway for 20 years. He pointed to a name on the program. She died when I was 25, cancer. For a long time, I couldn't work in theater. Being in these spaces without her felt impossible. Lisa looked at him with new understanding. What brought you back? She asked. I realized that staying away wasn't honoring her. It was hiding from her. The real way to honor the people we've lost is to live fully, to do the things they taught us to do, to be brave in the ways they were brave. He sat back down. Your mother taught you to sing, Lisa. Not so you could hide that gift behind a reception desk. She taught you so you could do exactly what you did today. Lisa felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been locked tight for 5 years began to loosen. Here's the truth, the director said, his voice firm now, businesslike. You have the raw talent for the role. No question. But you haven't performed in over a decade. You have no formal training beyond what your mother taught you. You'd be competing against people who've studied at Juilliard, who've performed in major productions. I know, Lisa said, her brief hope already dimming. I understand. I'm not finished, he said, and there was something in his smile that made her heart race. The question is, are you willing to work harder than you've ever worked in your life? Are you ready to prove that heart and dedication can compete with expensive training? Lisa stared at him, afraid to believe what she was hearing. Are you offering me the role? The director glanced at his casting assistant, who nodded. Then he looked back at Lisa and his smile widened. I'm offering you a chance. The next 6 months were the hardest of Lisa's life. And she'd lived through some pretty hard times. She'd thought grief was difficult. She'd thought working double shifts to pay rent was exhausting. But nothing had prepared her for the brutal reality of professional opera training compressed into half the time it should take. The director had given her a chance, but he'd been clear. She needed to be performance-ready in 6 months. Most singers trained for years for a role like this. Her days started at 5 in the morning. A vocal coach named Patricia, a stern woman in her 60s with perfect posture and zero tolerance for excuses, met her at the opera house before anyone else arrived. Patricia had trained some of the biggest names in opera, and she didn't care that Lisa was a feel-good story. She cared about results. Your mother taught you well, Patricia said after their first session, but she taught you like a gifted amateur. I need to turn you into a professional. That means breaking down everything you think you know and rebuilding it correctly. It was humbling. More than humbling, it was crushing. Lisa discovered that many of the techniques her mother had taught her, learned from books and recordings, were slightly wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong enough that they wouldn't hold up under the demands of 8 performances a week. She had to relearn how to breathe, how to support her voice from her diaphragm, how to preserve her vocal cords during long rehearsals. Some mornings, Lisa stood in front of Patricia and couldn't produce a single clean note. Her throat would tighten with frustration and fear, and the more she tried to force it, the worse it got. Patricia would make her stop, sit down, and start over. Tension is the enemy, Patricia would say. Your mother was right about emotion, about connecting with the music. But emotion without technique is just noise. You need both. After vocal training, Lisa had movement classes. She'd never realized how much opera singers had to act, had to move with grace and purpose across a stage. There was a choreographer, a patient man named David, who taught her how to walk like someone from another era, how to hold her body to convey emotion, how to hit her marks while making it look natural. You're thinking too much, David would tell her. Your body is tense. The audience can see it from the back row. You need to trust yourself. But trust was hard when everyone around her seemed to be waiting for her to fail. The other cast members were polite mostly, but Lisa could feel their skepticism. They'd all paid their dues, spent years in training, performed in dozens of productions, and here was the receptionist plucked from obscurity, getting the lead role in what was shaping up to be one of the most talked-about productions of the season. During lunch breaks, Lisa would overhear conversations. Not everyone bothered to whisper. I give her 2 weeks before she drops out, someone said. This isn't a fairy tale. Talent isn't enough. The director's lost his mind, another voice added. She's going to embarrass herself and ruin the whole production. Lisa wanted to prove them wrong, but some days she wasn't sure they weren't right. Her old co-workers from the reception desk tried to be supportive, but there was an awkwardness now. She wasn't one of them anymore, but she wasn't really one of the performers either. She existed in this strange in-between space, belonging nowhere. The worst part was the doubt that crept in late at night. Lisa would lie in her small apartment, her throat sore from training, her body aching from movement classes, and wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe she should have stayed behind that desk. Maybe some dreams are meant to stay dreams, safe and perfect in your imagination, never tested against the harsh light of reality. She called her best friend Rachel one night, 3 months into training, nearly in tears. I don't know if I can do this, Lisa admitted. Everyone's waiting for me to fail. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just fooling myself. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you remember what you told me at your mom's funeral? You said the worst part wasn't that she died. It was that she died with so much music still inside her, so many performances she never got to give. You said it felt like the world had been robbed of something beautiful." Lisa remembered. She'd been barely able to speak that day, but she'd said those words. "Don't rob the world of your music because you're scared," Rachel said. "Your mom didn't teach you to sing so you could give up when things got hard. She taught you so you could do exactly this, the hard stuff, the scary stuff, the stuff that matters." Something shifted in Lisa that night. The next morning, when she showed up for vocal training, something was different. She wasn't trying to prove herself to Patricia or David or the skeptical cast members anymore. She was singing for her mother. For the woman who'd lost her voice but made sure her daughter's voice would be heard. Patricia noticed the change immediately. "Good," she said simply. "Now you're ready to really work." The rehearsals intensified. Full cast rehearsals started, and Lisa had to learn to act opposite other performers, to react in the moment, to maintain her character even when she wasn't singing. The director pushed her hard, sometimes stopping scenes a dozen times to get a single moment right. "I'm not being cruel," he told her during a break, after a particularly grueling rehearsal. "I'm preparing you. Critics are going to come to this show ready to tear apart the receptionist who thought she could be an opera singer. You need to be so good that they can't. You need to be undeniable." Lisa nodded, swallowing hard. The pressure was enormous. The press had already gotten hold of the story. Articles appeared with headlines like "Cinderella Story at the Opera" and "From Reception Desk to Center Stage." Some were supportive. Others were skeptical, even mocking. One critic wrote that the director was turning opera into a reality show gimmick. Every article felt like another weight on Lisa's shoulders. But she kept showing up, kept training, kept pushing through the fear and doubt and exhaustion. Patricia worked with her on the final aria, the one Lisa had sung at her audition. "You sang this beautifully that day," Patricia said. "Raw emotion, pure and honest. But now you need to do it 8 times a week without destroying your voice. You need to make it look effortless even though it's not. That's the difference between a moment and a career." They practiced that aria hundreds of times. Lisa sang it tired, sang it fresh, sang it healthy, and sang it with a cold. She learned how to preserve herself, how to give everything without actually giving everything. It was a strange balance, holding something back so you'd have something left. 2 weeks before opening night, they did a full dress rehearsal. Lisa stood backstage in her costume, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. This was it. The first time performing the full show, start to finish, in costume and makeup with lights and orchestra. She was terrified. But she was also ready. As the curtain rose and Lisa stepped onto that stage, she wasn't the receptionist anymore. She was something else entirely. Something she'd been fighting to become for 6 long, brutal months. She was exactly who her mother had always believed she could be. Opening night arrived like a storm Lisa had been watching build on the horizon for 6 months. Now it was here, and there was nowhere to hide. She arrived at the Opera House 4 hours before curtain. The building felt different tonight. The usual quiet hum of rehearsals had been replaced by an electric tension. Backstage crew members moved with urgent purpose. The orchestra was warming up somewhere below. And outside, a line of people stretched around the block waiting to get in. The show had sold out weeks ago. Some people were there because they loved opera. Others came because they'd read the articles about the receptionist who dared to dream. And some, Lisa knew, came hoping to witness a spectacular failure. Nothing draws a crowd like the possibility of watching someone fall. In her dressing room, Lisa stared at herself in the mirror. The makeup artist had transformed her face into something that looked almost like a stranger. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo. The costume, a beautiful gown from the 1850s, fit her perfectly after countless alterations. She looked like an opera singer, but inside she still felt like that girl who used to answer phones downstairs. There was a knock on her door. Patricia stepped in, her usual stern expression softened slightly. "How are you feeling?" Patricia asked. "Terrified," Lisa admitted. "What if I forget the words? What if my voice cracks? What if everyone realizes this was a huge mistake?" Patricia sat down beside her. "Do you know what separates good singers from great ones? It's not who has the perfect technique or the most training. It's who can stand on that stage with their heart completely open, knowing they might fail and sing anyway. That's courage. That's art. I don't feel very courageous right now. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Lisa. It's singing while your knees are shaking. It's what you've been doing for 6 months. Patricia stood up. Your mother would be proud of you. Not because you're perfect, but because you showed up. You did the work. You're here. After Patricia left, Lisa had 30 minutes alone. She thought about her mother, about all those hours in their living room, learning to breathe, learning to feel the music. She thought about that hospital room 5 years ago, her mother's weak voice asking her to sing one more time. She thought about the promise she'd broken and was finally keeping. The 30-minute call came over the speaker. Then 15, then 5. Lisa made her way to the wings, her legs somehow carrying her forward even though she felt disconnected from her own body. The other performers gave her encouraging smiles. Even the ones who doubted her seemed to be rooting for her now. They were all in this together. The director found her in the wings. He didn't say anything, just squeezed her shoulder. In his eyes she saw belief. Not just hope, but actual belief that she could do this. The house lights dimmed. The audience settled into their seats. Lisa peeked through the curtain and immediately wished she hadn't. Every seat was filled. The balconies were packed. She'd never seen so many people in one place, all waiting, all watching. The orchestra began the overture. Lisa closed her eyes and listened. She'd heard this music hundreds of times during rehearsals, but tonight it sounded different. Fuller. More alive. This was real now. This was happening. The curtain rose. For the first few minutes, Lisa operated on pure muscle memory. Her body knew where to move because David had drilled it into her. Her voice knew what to sing because Patricia had made her practice until she could do it in her sleep. She was there on stage, but she wasn't fully present yet. She was too aware of the audience, too conscious of being watched. Then something shifted. It happened during her first solo. A moment when her character realizes that her past is catching up with her, that she can't run from who she is. As Lisa sang those words, she suddenly wasn't acting anymore. She was living it. She was that character and herself at the same time, singing about masks we wear and truths we hide. And just like that, the fear dissolved. Lisa stopped thinking about the audience, stopped worrying about hitting the right notes. She just sang. She told the story. She became the person her mother had trained her to be. The first act ended to strong applause. Lisa barely heard it. She was already thinking about the second act, about the big aria that was coming in Act 3, the one she'd sung at her audition, the one that had started everything. Intermission felt like it lasted both forever and no time at all. Then she was back on stage, the story building toward its tragic conclusion. Her character was dying, saying goodbye to the people she loved, facing the end with dignity and grace. When the moment came for Addio del Passato, Lisa felt her mother's presence so strongly, it was like she was standing in the wings, watching. The orchestra played the introduction. Lisa took a breath, the way Patricia had taught her, supporting from her diaphragm, keeping her throat open and relaxed. And she sang. It was different from the audition 6 months ago. More controlled, technically stronger. But the emotion was still there, still real. She sang about farewell to the past, about dreams that die, about holding on to beauty even as everything falls apart. Every word meant something. Every note carried weight. In the audience, people stopped moving, stopped breathing. Even the critics who'd come prepared to write harsh reviews found themselves leaning forward, caught up in something they hadn't expected. This wasn't just competent. This was transcendent. Lisa's former co-workers from the reception desk were crying openly. Rachel had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The director stood in the wings with his arms crossed, but his eyes were wet. When Lisa sang the final note, letting it fade into silence, the opera house was completely still. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Then the applause started. It began as a ripple and built into a wave, crashing over the stage like a force of nature. People rose to their feet, first a few, then entire sections, until the whole audience was standing, applauding, some of them cheering. Flowers started landing on the stage. Bouquets thrown from the balconies, a tradition Lisa had only read about. She stood there in her costume, breathing hard, overwhelmed, trying to understand that this was real. This was actually happening. The other performers came out for their bows, and the applause continued. But when Lisa stepped forward alone for her curtain call, the sound somehow got even louder. People were on their feet. their hands red from clapping, giving her the kind of reception usually reserved for the most famous singers in the world. Backstage afterward, Lisa couldn't stop shaking. Patricia hugged her, which Patricia never did. David was grinning like a proud father. The other cast members congratulated her warmly, all skepticism forgotten. The director just looked at her and said, "You did it. You actually did it." But the moment Lisa would remember most came later, when the crowds had thinned and she was alone in her dressing room, removing her makeup. She looked at herself in the mirror, really looked, and saw someone different from the woman who'd stood at that reception desk. Not better exactly, just more herself, more whole. She'd spent 5 years hiding from her grief, from her dreams, from the promises she'd made. She'd convinced herself that safety was better than risk, that a small life was easier than a big one. But tonight proved something her mother had tried to teach her all along. The only way to honor the people we've lost is to live fully, to take the gifts they gave us and use them, to be brave enough to fail, because the alternative, never trying at all, is the real tragedy. Lisa pulled out her phone and looked at an old photo of her mother, taken during one of her last performances before she got sick. Her mother was on stage mid-song, completely alive and present. "I kept my promise, Mom," Lisa whispered to the photo. "I know it took me 5 years, but I kept it." Outside her dressing room door, she could hear the opera house settling into quiet. Tomorrow there would be reviews to read and another performance to prepare for. There would be more challenges, more doubts, more moments of fear. But tonight Lisa had proven something to herself that no one could ever take away. She'd stood on that stage, opened her heart, and sang her truth. She'd taken the gift her mother had given her and shared it with the world, and the world had listened.